Hello everyone. I'd like to welcome you to the Space Interview Series on behalf of the Georgetown Astronomical Society and Georgetown Space Initiative. Today we're joined by Rick Davis, the Assistant Director for Science and Exploration at NASA's Science Mission Directorate. But that doesn't do him justice. Rick also co-leads a joint Science Mission Directorate and Human Exploration Mission Directorate study to begin the process of identifying potential human landing sites on Mars. Before his move to headquarters, Rick worked at Johnson Space Center and held numerous positions in the Flight Operations Directorate. Rick has chaired multiple international panels and working groups and was selected as Space Station Capsule Commander, CAPCOM, in 2003. And he was the lead CAPCOM for the Expedition 13 mission and Space Shuttle mission STS-119. Before this, Rick worked as the Deputy Director of NASA Operations in Star City, Russia, and he lived and worked in Russia altogether for over 3 years. Just to begin, I'm Owen Chbani. I'm a freshman majoring in Science, Technology, and International Affairs, joined by
Zachariah John. I'm also a freshman majoring in Science, Technology, and International Affairs.
And we're glad to be joined by you. I think I gave a pretty extensive introduction, but I'd love to hear, just to kind of fill in the gaps and I'd like to first start off with what got you interested in the space industry and Mars, and then maybe just walk us through your career as a whole and give us the 30,000-foot overview.
Okay. Well, first of all, Owen and Zach, thank you all for the invitation, and thanks to all your listeners for the time. So what got me interested in the space business? I frankly watched Star Trek, as a kid, and I fell in love with it. And I went to, for me, I loved history and I loved math and science when I was in high school. And if you told me that I would then go on to get a degree in history and a degree in aerospace engineering, followed by another degree in aerospace engineering, I'm not sure I would have believed you. I got the first degree in history, and we did a thing where we asked Jack Schmitt, who was one of the last two people to walk on the moon, to come down and talk with kids in the Virginia area. And I never expected him to accept, and he did. And so we got a newspaper chain that gave us a use of a helicopter to go around to a bunch of schools. And I could just tell we had finished going around in 2 days of tons of schools. And it was really a great experience. And then we were coming back towards Blue Ridge Mountains, and the moon was up in the sky, and you could see him looking at it. And you know what? I knew there was magic in his eyes in terms of what he had seen. And so that really got me to thinking that I wanted to figure out a way to get involved in the space business. And that's one of the things which I would really ask all of your audience, that if you have an interest in space and you can't figure it out, which was my case, please let us know, because we need a lot of creative new ideas. I lucked out because when I decided after the degree in history to go back for aerospace engineering, I met a wonderful woman named Susie Maroney at the University of Virginia. And she told me that she had gotten into a co-op slot at the Johnson Space Center teaching astronauts how to use parts of the space shuttle. And I spent about 15 minutes talking with Susie, and I realized, my God, that is exactly what I wanted to do. And so there's an element of luck, and there's also an element of just being dumb enough, audacious enough to go ask for opportunities. And I have to tell you, that's actually something I've really learned, which is that you got to put yourself out there. If you like this stuff, go out and do it. I mean, when I would say almost everything I've done that was really fun for me was really because I was crazy enough to go ask about it. And that's really how, the world responds to people, who love what they do and are willing to put themselves out there. And so that's kind of how I got in. And then it kind of went from there.
Awesome. Well, Rick, thank you for the great introduction. We wanted to ask a couple more specific questions.
Sure.
First, what was your time like when you spent 3 years in Star City? And then how was your experience working with the Russian space program? Kind of talk about this.
Yeah, thanks, Zach. I love that question. So during Bill Clinton's administration, there was an opportunity. We were working on Space Station Freedom. And then there was a real push or concern when the Cold War ended, that the Russian engineers, particularly space engineers, would actually go work for third world countries and potentially spread rocket technologies elsewhere that shouldn't have them. for obvious reasons. And so they decided to take the Russian space program and the US space program and said, Merry Christmas, y'all are now working together. And the first thing you're going to do is we're going to send up the space shuttle and dock it to the Mir space station, which is a Russian space station. And then we were going to do the International Space Station, no longer Space Station Freedom, but we were going to do a joint thing between Russia and all the other partners that had been working on Space Station Freedom. And it was a complete, I mean, it was just like, Merry Christmas, you're working together. And we actually had a hard time finding people to do it. And I would actually say that those are the kinds of opportunities that are really cool to go after, because you really get some really unique opportunities when that happens. I kind of sensed that might be happening. And so I had studied Russian at the University of Virginia. And then I started a Russian language program at Johnson Space Center so that we could start learning Russian. And then sure enough, I got picked for the job to go out to Star City. And they never had a training guy go out there in a management position. And so there's a lot of stories about, I couldn't get, they thought it was a spy. They thought, and frankly, the only way I ever got my badging to go into the military part was because every morning I was in this apartment building that was built for cosmonauts. And ages ago now, a lot of the cosmonauts are gone, but their families still own the apartments. And so I would go down this very little Russian elevator and I would always end up with the second number 2 general at Star City. And we started joking and making fun. And then before long, after about a month and a half of going up and down the elevator with him, we got a call that basically they figured out I wasn't a spy and was given a pass to go, to actually start doing my job. But it was because of that. And that's just a little picture of the relationships that you build. But it was really a tremendous experience in terms of a different space culture, but very similar to the one that we have in the States, but different. And I will tell you, there's a professionalism amongst them because they've been doing it for so long, like us, that is really, it's like brothers in a way. And so, and 2 stories I would say about that. Number one, when we lost the Columbia crew, some of the first people to outreach to me were actually my Russian colleagues who had similarly lost other people. And their immediate response was, if we can do anything, please let us know what it is. And that's kind of the brotherhood there. And even with the horrible things that are happening in the Ukraine right now, the U.S. and Russia still work together in space. I don't know how long that will last, but there is a sense of interdependence there and mutual respect in those cultures that are really pretty amazing, despite some of the things that are now happening on the ground. And I would say, if any of your listeners have an interest in working overseas, it's hard to imagine for me to imagine one that would be more culturally diverse than anything I had ever known, but such wonderful people. And there, and I was there for a little over 3 years. And I have to say, I have a second mom who lives in Star City, and if I don't see her when I go to Star City, I get in trouble. So, but really a great staff, and it was stressful. When we first started sending astronauts over there, they didn't have enough to do on the Mir space station, so we had to work on that. Then we had to, in the Mir space station, the Russians controlled everything largely, and so then when we went to the International Space Station, we were the integrators and in charge of things. So there were a lot of culture changes you had to work through. But everybody, was very professional about it and really tried to work through it. And you couldn't ask for it was a pretty interesting work experience.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thanks for shedding light on that. And I think that's a great segue to start talking about what was your experience like as Capcom or working with the ISS,
Yeah.
all these different populations, and maybe how did that inform your perspective now on future manned missions to Mars?
Yeah, so first of all, that was a tremendous learning experience. I had been doing training, and but after you've been in Russia with the crew members that were over there, you really learn a lot about how the things they worry about, particularly on the Russian side, and so you get in their heads. And a good capsule communicator is somebody who can get in the crew's heads and actually anticipate what they're worried about, be an advocate for them on the flight control team, and then relay news up to them from the flight control team that may be less than they. But the key thing is empathy, in my opinion. And so for the space station, so for shuttle, that was used to always be an astronaut that did the capsule communicator job. But for space station, because it was 24/7 operations, they ran short of astronauts to do it, and so they opened it up to a limited few. And I was lucky enough to get picked. I mean, and the certification process is pretty grueling. If you want an eye-opening, read a flight director's evaluation of you, 2 weeks into it, and it is pretty. If you ever want to have the experience of, can I do this job, that would be it. But you keep at it, and you keep learning, and eventually before long they sign you off to do it. And I have to say, it was really an exciting thing, because in a capcom position, you were like the deputy to the flight director, but you're also representing the crew office, and so you have to really be clear about which hat you're wearing. And you really have to learn to communicate, and you have to learn to be empathetic. For the space shuttle, if you ever listen to the old tapes, it's very military like in terms of how you relay information. For the space station, these people are up in this can for 6 months at a time. If you don't interject some humor into that and actually get to know them, it is just not going to be a good experience for you or for them. And so really learning to get in their heads, understand what they're worried about, and represent them is key. And so I really love the job. And actually, we were able to do some things that even the Capcoms don't do. So, for example, we put the internet on board the space station. I co-led a team that did that. And so, everybody wants internet, right? Including people in space. But, there was a lot of concerns about hackers. So, we had to jump through about 3,000 hoops to get it through there. But it was really cool to actually be a flight controller and actually put a system, brand new system on board the vehicle. And I couldn't have done that had I not been at Capcom. And so but I would say those things are big learning curves. You get a little afraid you can't do it, and then you just keep at it and eventually figure out, what, I can kind of do this thing. And you end up learning a ton as a result. So I love the work.
That's really awesome. Thanks for that. Now, knowing that you have like this breadth of experience in the space industry, could you maybe give us a why Mars? Why should we go? And then
Yeah.
maybe elucidate what the first manned missions to Mars will look like, our objectives, how what your role could be, or someone who worked in a role like yours could be, all that.
Yeah. So I love that question. Although I'm going to correct you about one thing, because it's not a manned mission to Mars; it's a human mission to Mars. And I'm pulling on that point because um, it's actually really fundamental. I have learned in this job that humility is a really important attribute. In these new areas like artificial intelligence or sending people out to Mars, no single human being has the answers. We need ideas from literally all over the planet. And so the words are even important. So that's why I say human, because we need the half of the population that's female helping solve these problems. And you all get that. I know that, but it's a terminology issue. But so with that caveat, I would say there's a couple of reasons for me that I'm personally very excited about it. Number one is that I think human beings do their best when they don't know if they can do it. Kind of like when I was a Capcom or a pilot. Sometimes you kind of wonder, can you do it? And then you start stepping your way into it, and you learn, oh my God, I really can do this. And you learn, and it's not just for individuals, but it's actually for societies, and I would actually argue for species, that you need to have these challenges that are really pushing you to learn what's really important. Going all the way out to Mars, is a long, long way. It takes about 3 years round trip to go out there, as we discussed when I was out at your doing the presentation at your school. And there's just a lot of things that can go wrong. But when you have people working together, they figure those out and they come up with those the solutions that are really cool. Um, I actually also I think that there are another number of other reasons why you go, which is one I will say is to take care of the Earth. And so let me explain that a little bit. because we've been rightly asked, well, why go to Mars when we need to take care of the Earth? And I think that is a perfectly fair question to ask. My answer is this: is that number one, you as an engineer and scientist, I've been taught to never to make decisions based off one data point, and we're trying to take care of this planet based off the one planet we know. And really, to take care of it, we need all the knowledge that we can acquire from planetary science. That's the study of other planets, to make sure that we really understand how the solar system works and how planets work, so that we can make sure we don't screw it up on this planet. That's number one. And Mars in our solar system is kind of convenient because there's only one other planet that humans currently can live and operate on, and that is Mars. So that's it. So you can put a geologist on there, you can put biologists, or as we call them, astrobiologists on there, climatologists, and understand why that planet froze up and why, our planet appears to be heating up, and make sure that we can understand those mechanisms well. Secondly, when you go out to Mars, everything gets recycled. Nothing gets wasted because it costs so much to go out there. And so those technologies that we learn are really critical. And, can you design a house that will recycle urine? Absolutely. Will you do it? Probably no, because we get complacent even on a planetary scale. But when you go out to Mars with a human mission out there, they're going to have to recycle everything. Everything is a resource, and that technology will come back to us because it's an exciting challenge to figure out. And so people figure it out, and they figure out how to bring it back to the home planet. And the third reason for taking care of this planet is that, you know what? We really are interdependent. We forget about it all the time because we just get stuck into our state or our country view. But, everyone in school today knows that we're really working on a multinational level at this point, and we have to work together. And these kinds of missions, just like the space station that still has, Western and Russian crew members working together. When you got to Mars, we're going to have to work together all with a lot of different space agencies to figure that out. And that ability to work together is sort of like a beacon on the hill of how we should be approaching problems, even back here on this planet, such as taking care of global warming. And so those would just be some of the reasons I think are really important to do. And now you ask about what is it that humans are going to do when they go out there. And I will tell you, it is becoming pretty clear that when the first crews land, Mars actually had oceans on it, and it had lakes and all that kind of stuff before it froze up. And now that a lot of that water ice is still there, it's just covered, if you can think of it, by dust and dirt. And we've seen it, and we know it's there. And I fully expect that when the first crews go out there, one of the things they're going to do, that I would expect them, is to drill down into that ice and understand, because it's basically a more extreme example, it would be ice coring, like we do in Antarctica. When you pull up an ice core, you bring up the entire climate history of the planet. And so that's probably one of the top priority things that I think we'll see human crews out there doing, so that we can really get a slice. It also happens to be that if there's life on the planet, it's probably down in that ice or very near it, because on the surface there's a lot of radiation, and that's really challenging for life. And so those ice cores could be very key for finding evidence of life on the second planet. And that is a major philosophical thing, because if life evolves on more than one planet, that's some really humbling and cool ramifications for our cultures here on this planet.
Astrobiology is exciting.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I would like to maybe dig a little deeper into mission design. How has Starship kind of played a role in your guys' planning for future human missions to Mars? And what do you think that's going to look like in terms of getting there, staying there, coming back?
So we don't know yet, to be blunt. We don't know that Starship works, but it is clear that the SpaceX company that Elon Musk has built is transforming low Earth operations. And it's not just SpaceX, it's Blue Origin, it's all these commercial entities that are doing it. They're driving the cost of getting into space much lower, which is enabling a lot of things. I fully expect that to continue out to the moon, and I think it's going to go all the way out to Mars sooner than most people realize. And basically, to get out to Mars, you just need to dramatically lower the cost of getting anything out there. And so I am hoping that they're tremendously successful in their lunar efforts and that they can actually send something out to Mars, because then you start dropping that cost and the ability to get a lot of explorers out there and really understand how that planet works with all the ramifications I talked about previously goes through the roof. And so lowering the cost, whether it be with SpaceX, Blue Origin, or any of them, is good. And actually, if you think about it, what we're doing, NASA's really been innovating, which I'm extremely proud about, is we've been innovating this idea of bring industry along with us. And now SpaceX launches more than anyone else on the surface of the planet, which is really amazing when you think about it. And I actually like to think of it this way. When they opened up North America back in the colonial days, the amount of gold and other wealth that was sent back to the Western countries or Europe was tremendous. It transformed the Middle Ages and many argue led to the Renaissance. When you start actually harvesting the resources of a solar system, I'm not talking about a continent, I'm talking about a solar system. The potential for economic gain is massive. And we are extremely lucky in the United States that we are innovating this kind of partnering with private companies that will not only be transformative in terms of what we can do, but transformative also in terms of the scale of the economy that we're working on. And, in the U.S., there are a lot of other countries that actually are sort of envious or want to emulate. Let me say it that way, because envious is a negative word. Emulate what we're doing here because we're actually leading by having these industries go in there. And the other thing, which I would say, Zach, that I think is really important is that I've been to SpaceX many, many times out of their factories in Hawthorne and in their Starlink factory in Seattle. And they are really doing what industry does well. They're cranking these things out, economies of scale. That's not what the government's good at doing. That's what industry's good at doing. And if we want to be successful and not just, have one or a few people in space all the time, but actually bring a civilization into space, we got to take all the good things that we do and hopefully leave the bad things behind, all the good things we do and bring them out into the solar system so that we can leverage that and create all kinds of opportunities for people all over this planet.
Thank you. So I wanted to ask you about
Yeah.
the human landing sites survey study
Mhm.
and how you guys chose, the specific exploration zones and regions of interest that you
Yeah.
guys identified as possible landing sites, because I know there's a lot of factors that go into them, whether it be science or, habitability. And I wanted to know how you guys classified that.
So that's a great question, Owen. And I would say we're still learning how to do this. So we need ideas. So, people out on your podcast community, have ideas. We want to hear it. And so I would say the current thinking is this. When we started this in 2015, we figured we needed access to resources and we needed access to cool science sites. And so and at the time we thought there were two types of water that the big resource is water. And it's not for drinking. It's actually for propellant. Where if we get that 8 hydrogen atom in a water molecule, we can make methane. And that is your return propellant. And if you can, and you're talking metric tons of that stuff. So if you have that, you can really drop the cost of Mars missions a lot. And so from an ISRU or in situ resource utilization standpoint, you need water, a lot of water. Eventually, you will go to farming, and that is also a big hog of water. And so water is really key. And we thought that there were two types of water that we should be looking at. One is called these subsurface ice deposits that I mentioned previously, and the second one is what we call hydrated minerals. That's basically just dirt and rocks that have water molecules locked up in the structure. Now, baking rocks to get water is not probably, sort of defies common sense. But on the moon, we may have to. But at Mars, when you have these massive buried, glaciers, that are just pure water, and we can see it too. There are places where the hillside slides away, and you can just see a whole block of pure water ice, and we know it's there. There are a lot of ways we know it's there. And so the trick is, we want to pick a site that's got access to a lot of water. And then the second thing you want to have access to a site that's really cool science. Because what happened in Antarctica, we anticipate being the same for Mars, which is that they first went to McMurdo, and then they actually established a base camp there where they could build up supplies and spare parts and all those kinds of things, so that if you have a winter that's really nasty, you don't die. That's a good thing not to do, right? And so you want that base so that you can branch out and explore from there, and you can handle the bad days that are difficult to anticipate. And so the base idea was there. And then in 2015, we kind of used 100-kilometer radius, or for the thing, and that was driven by how far we thought the rover could go, and get back. And so that drove these areas. And so we literally put out calls for potential sites from all over the planet. And it's the coolest thing. We got proposals from literally all over our first planet, from people all over our first planet, for our base location on the second planet. And that is just awe-inspiring to me, that you could have that kind of energy. We had 400 people participate in that. And it was really cool. But what it taught us is what we didn't know. And so we then realized we needed to map where these water deposits are, better than what we could do. We needed to understand the science that humans were doing. And so we've really made some progress. So, for example, I think that most people in the know now are not trying to use hydrated minerals for water as a supply. We realize that a very compelling science target is to drill into ice deposits at Mars for the climate history that you get, and that astrobiology potential. And so you start to see this thing converging down, and that's a really important thing to understand, because the ice deposits, they're in the north, well, actually in the higher latitudes going towards the poles, and then they taper off as you go down to the equator. And so that really led to an understanding that we need a new mission out to Mars, because we got to understand how they taper off. And so that one workshop helped drive a lot of these next steps that we were doing. I hope we have another one next year. And it's not to pick the site, because that'll go on for a number of years, but it will teach us what we need to do next, in the next few steps we need to do to really pick a great site. I love going down to Jamestown down in Jamestown, Virginia. And you know what? That's an example of picking a sucky landing site, because it is, if you go down there, it is basically an archaeological dig that was, because it floods. I mean, who picks a spot like that? I don't know why it took them so many decades to realize that if we just go in a little bit further, we're up on high, and we can actually pick a site that is, that doesn't flood all the time. And they ended up with Williamsburg, which has lasted to this day. But they iterated on it. But I think that what you realize is that there's a lot to learn to pick a site that is really going to be successful for the long term. And there's a lot of lessons to learn in Earth history. So Jamestown's one, and McMurdo and Antarctica is another one. And we're trying to apply all those lessons to Mars, so we can figure out where that location is and that toehold is for our, building up essentially, ultimately, eventually, a civilization on the second planet too.
Yeah, and your comment about the upper latitudes being really relevant for science goals actually got me thinking, because like nuclear, we spoke to Bhavya Lal earlier on this podcast, and she is a big proponent of nuclear thermal propulsion and nuclear as a method for space development. They actually had a question about how, specifically maybe nuclear on surface power and in space power, and how that would help enable science goals, because higher latitudes are more averse to solar power because of less insulation. So I wanted to ask what technologies we need to mature before we go on a Mars mission, and specifically towards the nuclear versus solar for power on.
So a couple comments. Bhavya is very sharp. I would say that I just actually was the deputy lead for a study that we did on nuclear propulsion options that actually was reporting through Bhavya's office. And I would say that what we've come to realize, there's nuclear thermal, and there's something called nuclear electric with a chemical propulsion system that's there. I increasingly believe that we're probably going to end up with nuclear electric. And the reason is because any successful civilization on a cold planet like Mars needs power. You live and die by power. And the technology development for nuclear electric is almost identical to the technology development for surface power. And it's that synergy between the two that I think you'll see it. Can we rule out nuclear thermal? No, we need to do more homework to make sure that we understand the trades. But if I had to bet, that's probably where we're in because we basically get a twofer there. You don't want to go real far north or real far south because carbon dioxide will freeze out at those higher, and it's just miserable. It's hard on the machines. Therefore it's hard on the people. Um, and you really want to have nuclear because Mars can get dust storms that can last for 8 months. The last one lasted about 8, 9 months. And when those dust storms are global, you literally are blocking out most of the sunlight. And so if you're dependent on solar arrays, you're screwed. And so I think that the lesson there is that if you're serious about any kind of presence on the planet, you better figure out how to do nuclear. Do we need to have fancy megawatt systems to begin with? No. I think that we have learned that we can use, we actually have something called kilopower, which is under development, and Bobby will probably mention that. And those are basically 10 kilowatt electric reactors. They're very small. We've actually tested them, and they're pretty far along in the development cycle. So you can imagine having four of those, and then you could provide 40 kilowatts for the initial stays on the planet. But you're going to want to go up. So for example, like in the Starship scenarios that SpaceX talks about, they're talking about a megawatt. So that's a lot of power. And they're talking about acres and acres of solar arrays. Well, you know what? Setting all that up on an alien planet is not trivial. And they're the first to admit that. So really, I think we can do the initial missions probably sooner than later if we try to not make it super fancy, but strategically we should be investing in these more robust, more powerful systems because we know that humans have just an insatiable need for power and we're going to need it. So it's really key to make those kinds of investments now sooner than later.
And also, just to follow on, I guess,
Yeah.
what are the greatest obstacles you see to a sustained human presence on Mars? So, kind of moving away from, probably the flag and footprints that not necessarily flag and footprints because they'd be staying
Yeah.
for a long time, but moving from that model to a sustained human presence on Mars.
So, how to say this? I think there's a couple, and you've hit on them. So initially, you want to have propulsion systems that get you out there faster. Um, so when our bodies are out in zero gravity, our muscles atrophy and our bones atrophy. You can mitigate those with exercise. At least we believe you can with 6 month cruise because we got a lot of experience with people in space in zero gravity for 6 months. Um, there is, when you get out past the Van Allen belts, those are magnetic shields essentially on the Earth. You get out past those, you get a lot of radiation out there, and so you don't want to leave the human body being exposed. That can lead to cognitive degradation, and that can also, and we just don't really have any experience with that other than what was there. So we need to understand that. And we need to accept the fact that if you send someone out on a 3-year mission, you have to assume that you may always be in space. If the landers are broken, the worst case scenario is not 6, 9 months out there, then on the surface of Mars, then back. The worst case is actually 3 years in zero gravity and in a high radiation environment. So we really need to be understanding that as best we can. Um, Propulsion is important because you can actually start doing trajectories where it's not 3 years, it's 2 years, and we all like being on jets to take us there a lot faster, right? And that's will be the same for space travel out to Mars. Power is another one. As we talked about, you're going to want power if you want to have any kind of sustained presence. You want lower launch costs, and that's fortunately coming along as we talked about, so that you can drop the cost down of all these pieces. Um, and then you want, the other stuff like habitats and laboratories. I'm not so worried about those because we actually know how to do those. Um, I think a more interesting problem is how do human beings react, isolated from the Earth for that long. Um, I would like to see more crews going out for 1 year missions on space station. I'd like to see them going for 2 years and understanding, what, we're doing, how that works for the human being. It's really difficult to totally and know what we need for Mars missions because, once they burn the engines to go to Mars, they ain't coming back for 3 years, right? Or maybe two if we got the propulsion systems. Um, but how the human being reacts to that and how many people you need on there to make sure they work well together and don't have cultural issues. And I'll just would share this, that as a capsule communicator for the space station, when we had 3-person crews, we had what I would call dysfunctionalities. It's just there weren't enough people in the space station to kind of, if they couldn't speak the same language or if there were personality challenges, when we jumped to 6, most of that went away, and that's a fairly multicultural setting. And when we go out to Mars, there's going to be multinational missions, and there's going to be a lot of different cultures. And so I get nervous when we talk about only sending 4 people because I'm a farm boy. Number of 4 is a lot closer to 3 than it is to 6, and I saw issues with 3. So I think really understanding what type of people we send, how many we send, and make sure that we have a really good plan. We can be prepping all of that now and making sure that we have really good plans as best we can do it. And then finally, I would say this, there's never a perfect answer. You know what? The big problem about going to Mars is we've just never done it. And so I would sure take a shorter, I take a risk, do our homework now, do a 3-year mission out there. Understand it might even be orbital the first time, but learn how to get out there and keep crews alive and do that. And you'll be surprised at what it enables in terms of creativity of all these spacefaring nations that are working on this stuff. They will, once you get out into orbit around Mars, you are going to the surface. It is not even a question of if at that point, but because you'll have done 8/10 of it, and going down to the surface is a piece of cake at that point. But getting all the way out there, learning to keep people, crews alive and happy, letting them teleoperate things on the surface, doing all of that, that alone would be a massive victory. And then you kind of earn your way down to the surface and take it step by step and build up, really, if you're there for really presence, right? They're not in a rush. You want to do it in a way that doesn't, where you don't end up screwing it up and then not be able to do it again. You got to build a campaign to go do this. And then if you do it that way, whether it's 3 or 2 years, it doesn't really matter. We're going to figure it out, and we'll slowly start interweaving in those higher power systems, those more powerful propulsion systems, and we can figure out how to how to really do it in a way that is robust and allows us to really establish a permanent presence there.
That's great. I also wanted to ask a question about just general mission design, because once you start looking at missions to Mars, you also hear about opposition class missions. And I wanted to know if you could just give us a little insight on what those are and what their pros and cons of those missions are.
So I kind of already alluded to, but you're using the technical jargon, which is fantastic. So when I say there's basically 2 types of missions out there, there's what we call a conjunction class trajectory. So that's basically in the orbital mechanics business, that's what we call a home and transfer orbits. Those are the most efficient ones. And so you wait for the planets to line up, take 6 to 9 months to get out to Mars. And then you have to park in the Martian system. So that could be in orbit, that could be on the ground. It depends on how you want to split it up. You have to wait in the Martian system about 500 days, and then the planets line up again so that you can come back, and it takes 6 to 9 months to go back. And when you add it all up, that's about 3 years. There is another class of trajectory, which is what you call the opposition class trajectories, and so you basically dive into Venus a bit, and you often get a flyby on Venus. In other words, you pick up energy from Venus when you do it. Those tend to be very propulsion intensive missions, and they can't be done with chemical systems. That's why we've been looking at the nuclear systems to figure out how to do it. And if you think about it, the beauty of that is that it's like a 2-year mission versus 3 years. And so it's not only reducing the radiation that the crew's getting, which is good. They get a little more when they go in close to Venus, right? But it's really mostly out past the Earth. So it's not, so that isn't really a big factor. But if you think about it, that, when you're in a flight control room and what you are going through your head when you show up for your shift is, I hope we don't have the bad day on my shift. And when you go home, you go, We didn't have the bad day on my ship. It's someone else's problem. And so what that's really saying is that, when they are out in these hostile alien environments, which we haven't totally learned to work within yet, and we will, um, you want to minimize how much time they have to be out there. The trip out and back and waiting, isn't really on the planet, the destination thing. So if you can cut that down, it's like, why spend 20 hours in an airplane if you can do it in 6, right? And so it's the same question. And those opposition class trajectories are basically set up if you have the propulsion systems so that you can actually cut the total mission time down to 2 years. And what that does though is it means that when you get out to Mars, you're only really in the Martian system instead of 500 days. You're there for about 30 days, 40 days, somewhere in that range, because there's just less time there. Now, does that mean that's the only way? No, because what I would envision happening is that we'll eventually have nuclear systems that allow us to do these opposition class trajectories. We'll eventually have astronauts full time on Mars, and they will rotate. Some of them will rotate off of Mars on those faster trajectories, and the new people will come and we'll swap them out that way. And so there'll probably eventually be permanent presence on the planet. But we just use those faster trajectories with that shorter stay time in the Martian system so that we can drop new people off and pick new old people up and then bring them back home. And so you end up with a very nice way of approaching a more permanent presence there. But we have to grow to that. But I'm absolutely convinced we will grow to that, and faster than probably most people think.
Yeah, and just to put you on the spot, how quickly do you think we'll get to a first mission, crewed mission to Mars? And then beyond that, when do you see us to start move into that sustainable operations mode where it's not just one mission and one mission, but it's back to back?
We don't know yet. I mean, that's that's that real answer. I would say that two other things. One, that in the short term, we always overestimate our abilities, but watch out in the medium and long term, because if you lay the foundation right, you can actually end up going faster than most people realize. And so let me give you an example. Like commercial cargo to the space station, that took forever to put in place. But oh my God, watch it spawned an entire new industry. And what we are doing now with commercial launch providers is second to none. And it is really transforming the entire space industry right now. And the same thing will happen out at the moon and out at Mars if NASA keeps pursuing that paradigm, if you will. I'm absolutely convinced. And so the other thing is, don't try to do too much at one time. And so I personally hope that we do orbital missions first before and maybe with an optional landing if the landers are ready. But don't try to do everything at one time, because then it ends up being too expensive, too complicated, and people can't get their heads around it. I've often said, and I absolutely believe, the problem about Mars is not technology. The problem about Mars is a belief issue, a belief that it's too hard to be done. And the problem with that belief is that it becomes self-fulfilling. And so you end up, if you think it's impossible, you know what? Your head doesn't get wrapped around it enough that you actually say, how do I break the problem down, and actually start doing it? If you keep it simple and just get out there and not try to make it too complicated, then the number of things you have to do drops. And then you get past that belief issue and you go, wow, we can actually really do this. If we do this. And I've been really fortunate to work. I work with something called the International Mars Exploration Working Group, which is 27 space agencies. When I look at the talent across those 27 space agencies and their commitment to making humans a multiplanetary species in general, I absolutely believe that if you keep it simple, we can be out there sooner than later, and then we will start figuring out how to do the next steps, which is actually get the power systems down there, get the habitats, the laboratories. I mean, when we go there, we want to do kick-ass science, and to do that, you're going to need infrastructure down there, and you're going to need power, and you're going to need all those things. So don't try to do it all at once, because then nothing happens.
I think a big issue is also Mars missions don't fit into two presidential terms.
Yeah, so keeping it simple helps with that problem, right? Because then so really, if you think about it, once human beings know that other human beings have gone all the way out to Mars, it will happen because people in school just accept that as a reality, right? So, like when they did the original Apollo missions, yeah, actually, from a landing site standpoint, they kind of screwed it up, in my opinion, because they went to 6 different landing sites and they didn't set up any infrastructure. But they, but they did crack the perception issue, which is that they couldn't be done, and they did it. And now, when people are in school, they go, you know what? Humans went out there, when we can do it too. And really, if we can get humans all the way out, out to Mars, they will realize that human beings really are much more capable than we thought we were, and we can handle being a multiplanetary species with all the ramifications that has for us.
Just for a second, I want to shift away from Mars for a bit and look
Yeah.
at the planetary science sphere in general. The
Okay.
Planetary Science Decadal just came out, and
Yep.
one of its big stories is the dedicated Uranus mission and an Enceladus mission recommendations for the future, of course.
Yep.
But of course, it also re-endorsed Mars Sample Return, Europa Clipper, and Dragonfly. So I just wanted to ask, outside of Mars, what missions are you most excited for, and what gaps do you really want to see filled in our general idea of planetary science as a whole?
So I know many of the people we're still internally to NASA evaluating that report. So the way it works is you have an external body of experts, and there were some really crackerjacks on that team. They go through and say we believe these are the priorities. Then NASA goes through an internal process of assessing those things. So we're doing that. So I really can't talk too much about that. But what I can say is that these people know what the hell they're talking about. They have some really cool things that are there. Um, you know, I think Mars sample return is really a key step that's there. We need to make sure we keep the costs under control. That's critical. But I and they actually did something in this decadal that has not been done before. They actually, in terms of Mars, they actually started asking, what do we need to know before we send humans in there? And so there's some really pathfinding ideas that are there that I think will influence what we do or need. And I think that was really that was part of their charter, if you will, to do that. And they did some great work on that. And they basically said just what I talked about. There's just growing awareness that when humans go, they're probably getting into that ice because it's a perfect use of a human being for accessing the ice and understanding it for both science, for all the reasons I described, as well as for using resources out there. And so you see those pieces there. But in general, they de-emphasize Mars a bit because they are trying to get more other missions out into the solar system. And if you apply that maxim I said that you want to have multiple planets so you can understand how this planet works, that is really compelling. Um, and I do believe that if we try to take care of this planet with one data point, we're really making a mistake.
And I wanted to ask about Mars Sample Return because obviously NASA is investing a huge amount of money into it. It's spread out over multiple missions and
Yeah.
multiple decades. So I wanted to ask, what's the big payoff for Mars Sample Return, and how does returning samples help us do science that we couldn't otherwise do with, Perseverance and Curiosity, and obviously satellites in orbit?
Yeah. So bringing back samples is invaluable because a lot of the equipment you need to analyze them are so heavy we can't send them all the way out to another planet. And so bringing back even bringing back the samples from Mars, which has never been done before, is really key from a science standpoint. And it has been a priority from the science community for literally decades, and a top priority. Let me be clear about that. That's why the Decadal was pushing on that. And it's for that insight that it gives us that we just can't carry the equipment all the way out to Mars. Actually, for human spaceflight, there are a couple other factors that about Mars sample return that I think are important. Number one, it will be the first round trip demonstration all the way out to Mars, where we actually launch off the surface of an alien planet, rendezvous with a mothership, and then bring something back. And that is exactly what humans will do. And we really understanding that round trip is really key. Second thing is that we really need to understand the particle sizes we're dealing with out there. Because if the particle sizes that the people are breathing, they're going to be breathing Martian dust. There's no question about it. There are toxicity issues, but really the one I worry about the most is the particle size, because if the particles are fine enough, they actually act like asbestos and can get stuck in your lung with all the health issues that's associated with that. So really getting a better insight into that is key. And I would say those would be two examples of things that I think that Mars sample return will shed light on in terms of enabling human space flight out there as well, in addition to the science goals. Now, when humans go, let me back it up. I think those are important samples. I suspect that we will probably want to access the ice robotically as well at some point. And so, for example, the European Space Agency is planning essentially an ice drill. And then even in the decadal, they propose a Mars Life Explorer, or MLE, there. And really, if you think about it, when humans go, we're like 50% by body mass of microbes, right? So we're basically sacks of microbes if you're an astrobiologist, right? And so we're gonna bring those microbial populations with us to Mars, and it'd be tricky to distinguish between them and any biology on Mars. And so if you think about it, this idea of after Mars sample return somehow pulling in samples from down in the ice is really a control data point that you probably want to have before the humans get there with the more significant drills to really bring back potentially ice cores. And so you see a nice sequence ramping up for there. Now, key to doing that is getting those launch or delivery costs down so that you can actually do that. You could easily envision that after Mars sample return, we jump straight to humans being there. I personally think that's probably a mistake to do that if we can avoid it. So you can sort of see a sequence where you're bringing back samples. And in the case of the humans, they're not just bringing back samples like that. They are probably actually bringing back whole ice cores like they do from Antarctica. And with the science that comes along with that would be absolutely amazing. I don't know if I answered your question, but hopefully I gave you a sense of the science priorities about Mars return, as well as the insights that it enables for you, or some of the insights it enables for human spaceflight out there.
Well, Rick, thanks for a really inspiring discussion, honestly.
Yeah.
Since some of our time is running out, I just wanted to close with just a couple questions.
Yeah, sure.
Well, a lot of your career has been very policy focused. So for students who are interested in space policy or the space industry, what advice do you have for young professionals? And just in general, what advice do you have for us who are interested in space and with this booming industry in the next decade?
Yeah.
Get involved.
So co-op, intern, and just get your foot in the door. I didn't understand that for the longest kind of time, but really, if you love this stuff, get in the door. And so even if it means you volunteer, or or if it means you take a sort of lower paying internship. A lot of people get very focused, for understandable reasons, about money coming in, and you have to be. That's a reality of life. But get in the door, because once you're in the door and people meet you, they will help you find a home that is really exciting for you in your career. And you're in there, you're going to chili cook-offs or whatever, and you just start building up all those relationships that are really key for helping you figure out where you want to spend a fair amount of time. And I think it's really key. And even before that, there's something that I think everyone should do throughout their career, which is that, if you're interested in, say, space exercise, let me make one up, right? Then find out who the people are that are doing space exercise. Don't be shy. You get one life to live. Call them up, ask them for 45 minutes, and build a whole set of questions so that when you have the conversation with them, don't ask for an hour because they freak out if you ask for an hour, but ask for 45 minutes, and it probably will morph into an hour and a half if you prep it right. Nowadays with Google, you can actually have really good questions for them, and they're going to see your enthusiasm. And it's not just getting a job. You're really just trying to figure out how you plug in. And then once you figure out how you plug in, then you go after that internship, or co-op slot. I'm saying it multiple times just to kind of drive the point home. But I will tell you, when I see that somebody has actually taken the initiative, and I look at a lot of resumes, has taken the initiative to learn how to do it, and they've been methodically figuring out what it is that they want to do. They may not have the perfect answer. I don't even care if they're 4.0. What I care about is that they're passionate and that you see it in their work, that they're driving to something. And if someone wants to, whatever it is, they want to, you just get a sense that they're really serious about doing it. Then that's very inspiring, and also really you want to pick those kind of people. And the other thing which I would say is that the really cool areas, whether it be Mars or artificial intelligence or some of these more really new areas, it is about humility. No one has all the answers, right? And so understanding that we is 1,000 times more important than I, and that only answers that at work come together as a team. If you embody that, that is going to come out as you apply for these jobs, and that will help you get your foot in the door. But it really is about humility. I've seen some people who apply and all they can talk about is what they have done, and they don't talk about them being on teams. Well, I've come to realize that it's only in teams that you solve these problems. And so when you have someone, and that's particularly in the new areas. And so if you sort of have that humility, but also that audacity to go after it, you know what? That's pretty cool. And I would say those are attributes that I think if people do it, they really will be amazed with it. But you get one life to live. Go for it with gusto. There's no downside not to try it. I would never have been a Capcom. I would never be working on the stuff I've done and I was nervous about even asking about all of those spots. And there were times where I wasn't sure I was ready to do it. But you know what? You keep learning, keep being humble, you actually figure out how to do it.
Thank you. That was a really great conversation, and I think that was a lot to learn for everyone. I know there's not so much information for young space professionals to really get into the field, especially on the policy side. And that was just a really interesting conversation. So again, we're really thankful to have you and thankful for all your time. And if there's anywhere you'd like people to find your work or maybe follow you on Twitter, feel free
Yeah,
to.
Twitter, it's at Red Planet Rick. And I would just say this, that um, anybody, um, everybody who's doing the cool stuff in space knows they should be paying it forward. And what I mean by that is that they need to be helping students figure out their path as much as possible. And so just know that really the people who are worth talking to are the one will know that they want to do that. And so if there's anything we can do to help, the bottom line is we need a bunch of bright, creative people who understand that we live in a multinational world who like figuring those kinds of things out, whether it's in policy or in space engineering. And I'm not alone in that assessment. There are a bunch of people who feel the exact same way at the agency and in the companies. They need bright, creative people who are willing to be a little audacious, and that's all you can ask for.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Rick.
All right, thank you. Take care. All right, bye bye.